This is Funder. When you subscribe, you learn how to turn knowledge into money. New Zealand has always believed it could outrun its size, but numbers don't care about the folklore. And the numbers tell a very different story. Our productivity has stalled, our output per worker is trailing behind our peers by a gulf that grows wider every year. Today, we are going to tear the curtain down because you cannot fix what you refuse to confront. And to do that, we brought in someone who has spent his career watching the economy from the only vantage point that matters, the cold edge of data. Nick Tuffley, ASB Chief Economist, the man who reads the pulse of the nation without blinking. Nick, our exports in New Zealand were hit by COVID and they haven't really recovered. What is going on?
When you look back over our export performance, whilst we do think of ourselves as an exporting nation, what we are seeing is that the share of our economy that's basically going to exports has been declining a bit, and we are losing a bit of pace with others. Now, COVID certainly had a bit of an impact on what's been happening because we saw a lot of disruption through that time, but it sort of goes back a little bit further than that. Now, when we're looking at what's been happening with the economy itself is that what we can see is that the composition of the economy has sort of shifted a bit over time, where we're doing less stuff in that kind of what we call the tradable world, which is stuff where you are making stuff which is a lot more sort of export focused or import competing, and there's been more and more of our sort of capital and resources essentially going into, I guess, what we call that more domestic part of the economy. So sort of part of that is around, say, property will be one example, but a lot more focus on, say, services and other areas as well. And that has meant we've gone from a shift from part of the economy where you tend to find it's a bit more productive, which is the parts that are competing with the rest of the world, to a shift into a lot more activity that's more domestic focused and less exposed to competition. I suppose if I was going to give a bit of an analogy, if you think about Japan's rise after World War II, it's built up these sort of massively competitive export industries, but at the same time, its domestic economy was often very inefficient and in some ways often protected as well. So I think for us, challenges, we do need to focus on boosting our economy in those tradable areas, because we've been sort of losing out a bit of market share, you could say, over time. And it is also the area where you tend to get the bigger sort of like productivity hits. It's the businesses that are interacting with the rest of the world tend to be the ones that feel the heat of that competition a lot more, get exposed a lot more to innovative ideas as well.
And we seem to be getting an ever-increasing reliance on China.
Well, we have, over a period of time, seen our export income sort of really benefit from the fact that China's growth has exploded. And it's gone through probably a transition over the last 20 years in particular, where its need for importing a lot of resources, whether it's food, things like iron, things for making concrete, has just skyrocketed over that period of time. So whilst we become perhaps more reliant on China, it's been a thing where we've benefited from the goose that lays the golden egg. We have seen phenomenal rise in our overall export incomes, mainly through the prices being a lot firmer than what they would otherwise be. So it has helped lift up things like our dairy and meat prices, as an example, in a way that we otherwise wouldn't have likely seen through that period. But look, that whole diversity angle in there, you never put all your eggs in one basket. You have seen that message start to be taken up a little bit more over the last 5-10 years. One of the ironies we've seen is that we've seen quite a bit of diversification, whether by accident or by design, into the US market, which is one where it rose up to be our second biggest export market for goods and services over 2024. But here we are in 2025, and we've seen Donald Trump putting into place tariffs on there. So yes, you don't want to have all your eggs in one basket, but also too, you do end up seeking out those markets that do look like they're going to provide you with strong returns. And China's done that for 20 years. The US has been doing that increasingly in recent years, but we'd also need to look further afield. And that's why you do see the government focusing a lot on expanding trade deals in parts of the world where we may not be trading with them much at the moment, like, say, India, and the sort of deal with the United Arab Emirates, for example. But look, in time, we're likely to see those agreements help lift our trade exposures there and just diversify our trade markets a bit more.
Well, whilst we're looking at China, how is this conflict between China and Japan going to benefit us potentially? They're in conflict, they're export partners. If China stops importing from Japan, what can we, as New Zealand, do to take advantage of this little situation that they're in?
Challenge for us is that if China stops buying things from Japan, well, what exactly are those things, and is there any avenue for us to benefit from? And I think for us, we probably more complement Japan, where it's exporting a lot of technology. For example, we're more exporting sort of food and fibre, if you think about wood and wool and things as well. So we may not see any direct opportunities for us to benefit from that conflict. I think the key thing that we probably need to sort of step back and look at is look, you do get these spats that pop up from time to time, and sometimes they can be a bit performative as well, particularly when it's around things like countries' comments on Taiwan, which China is very sensitive to. So look, as long as growth in both those countries doesn't get affected by this, that will be basically the best outcome for us. It's hard for us to probably benefit directly from that conflict because we're not able to sort of jump in and say, hey, we'll supply you with something that, say, people in China may be less keen to buy from Japan. Whereas if you look at, say, the US and Canada, where Canadians are going, well, hey, we don't really want to buy American beef or dairy products or wine, but they might be more inclined to buy our products. And that's where we may, you can benefit a bit from times when there's a little bit of tension between countries.
Well, our productivity, reading the ASB report that just came out recently, our productivity 25 to 30% below the OECD. Weakness seems to be a trend for New Zealand, and we are very interest rate sensitive. What are the key findings from that report, and how can New Zealand catch back up to even just being that baseline of the OECD countries?
Yeah. So it's not a new challenge. I think we've probably spent about 5 decades sort of admiring this problem, but we haven't done much about it. So as the research that Wes and Mark sort of really noted, it's that role of that tradable versus the non-tradable economy, where we do tend to see the sort of productivity being stronger in those tradable areas, less so in the non-tradable areas. And unfortunately, that's where we've directed our efforts, I suppose you could say, into expanding that. So, look, really focusing on how we can boost the performance of those sort of more trade-intensive parts of the economy, a really important part of that for one thing, because that will mean that we're starting to get back into those areas where there's potentially a bit more productivity and a bit more scope to get exposed to the rest of the world. Some other research we've done in the past has also sort of pointed to it's those sort of frontier firms as well. So the fact that you've got businesses that are on that cutting edge with the rest of the world, engaging with that, getting exposed to new ideas and technology, adopting them themselves, and then those filtering out into other sectors in the economy. Things like that really help as well. And really, when you look at New Zealand, also we do need to think hard about where are we driving our efforts and things like lifting education, which is a really important part of it, getting the infrastructure in place as well, and that's a role for government to help with that, matching up the right skills that we need. And another thing also is there's some positives here for New Zealand potentially is, look, adoption of AI. Look, there's no reasons why New Zealand can't be a sort of very strong user of AI. We're a small country. We're being able to start getting really lean into that tech space there's a lot of potential for us. We're not having to worry about the long distances that our goods need to travel to export markets. The fact that what we do see at times is that shipping lines, say, may reduce their services or do less direct services with New Zealand. That just sort of ups the cost and increases the time to get to market. So sort of a real focus on how we can, adopt technology ourselves to boost productivity, but also sort of really lean into that development of technology as well. And we do see a number of companies in New Zealand that have done that really well too. So pushing in AI, look, we saw that over the next few decades, you could end up lifting GDP by about $20 billion on an annual basis over a period of time by sort of really pushing through on that AI adoption. So I guess that's a good reason for us to all be sort of looking hard at how we can get much better at asking the right questions out of ChatGPT to find the solutions to the world.
Yeah, well, I've just switched over my business account to make sure I've got that premium subscription. So if we look at other countries that are doing productivity well, what are the policy areas or access to capital areas that New Zealand's government should be looking to bring in that can bring our productivity way back up to where it needs to be?
Yeah. So one bit is definitely that infrastructure part of it. So that we have gone for a number of years where we've arguably underinvested in our infrastructure, but we actually spend a fair amount on infrastructure. We just get sort of really, really poor quality results out of where that money is going. So look, that is one. Another lesson that we see from places like, say, Singapore and, say, tech hubs is that, a bit of clustering of like-minded businesses and industries helps, because you're getting more ideas, more people with the same skills in the same vicinity, and that helps as well. But also just collaboration. So when you're going, like, say, across government through into sort of like research areas, often which are funded by the government as well, throughout into the business sector, and just sort of piecing all those things together so that they're working a lot more coherently. Things like that can also help you go in the right direction as well.
Yeah, well, one of the charts in your productivity pack was about how low our innovation and R&D spend is in New Zealand relative to our peers as a percent. The Callaghan innovation, I've seen it, it's winding down. New Zealand's government support in that space hasn't been effective. What can we do to get our R&D spending up to where our peers are, and that should impact our productivity?
There's doing a few things in there, and the government's certainly looking very hard at how it has been funding research and looking to do it differently and hopefully more effectively as well, and make sure that the purpose of that research is a lot more directed at outcomes which are desirable for us as one. There's definitely also a role to be looking at how the government can more directly incentivize research and development by companies as well, because that would certainly help raise that spend, because it is relatively low. And another thing is look, we have seen the earlier sort of investment boost policy come through by the government as well earlier on this year. Look, I'd say that's an example of ways in which the government's just trying to tweak things a little bit to give people incentives to invest in things, which will include things like technology that can help with productivity as well. So looking at how the government can further incentivize things. Admittedly, it's a time when the government itself doesn't have a lot of money, which is why that investment boost looked like it was relatively good bang for buck, say, compared to giving a corporate tax cut, because you were more likely to stimulate a decent amount of investment without it actually having to cost the taxpayer a huge amount in sort of extra incentives.
Does it just come back to savings, that New Zealand businesses and people don't have enough saved away? So they don't have anything to reinvest, and what we need to do is up that savings rate, up the KiwiSaver rate, give some sort of incentives to reinvest.
Yeah, when you look at New Zealand, we've been very, very good at spending more than what we earn from the rest of the world. That's another way of saying that we also invest more than we save, in a sense. There's some sort of deficit in there in terms of we're reliant on foreign capital to keep the lights on going forward. So one thing we may need to do as a country is accept that actually we do need to be saving more than what we have been. And you are seeing a bit more focus come on that. You're seeing the government upping KiwiSaver contributions, talking about upping them further over time, which will increase that sort of domestic pool of savings as well.
Nick Tuffley, ASB Chief Economist, thank you. Before we go, most people treat their KiwiSaver the way they treat an old photo album. They know it exists, they know it matters, and they never bother to open it. And that small act of neglect can cost them more than they realize. If you want clear, simple guidance on choosing the right provider and the right type of fund, you can talk to Wealth HQ without paying a cent. Maybe you like the thrill of crypto, maybe you want nothing to do with investments that profit from conflict, maybe you just want a sense of control over where your money goes. Wealth HQ strips the uncertainty out of the process. If you want to understand your options, the link below will take you there.